I put in some seriously long hours as an EMT in my small town. Shifts can go on for 12 hours, sometimes more, but occasionally we luck out with shorter 8-hour shifts. Most days, it's just me and one partner handling routine calls. Real emergencies are rare, and up until recently, the worst we'd handled was a nasty car accident that put a few people in the hospital for weeks. Not long ago, my partner, who goes by Rob, and I got called out to check on an elderly woman who had reported an intruder in her house. By the time we pulled up, the police were already there. They'd patched her up a bit before we got there, and we went ahead and treated a small cut on the back of her head and some bruising around her spine, particularly around the C3 and T2 vertebrae. The thing that stuck out to us was her behavior. She was so panicked that she had to be restrained while we worked. She looked terrified, like she was on the edge of some sort of breakdown. She kept muttering to herself, her words running together, and Rob and I chalked it up to the fear and adrenaline. We couldn't get her name at first, but the officers managed to find her ID, and we learned her name was Martha H. Carroll. Martha didn't respond to us at all and stayed curled up in a tight ball. Rob's a big guy, built like a tank, and I'm no lightweight either, but between the two of us, we couldn't get her out of that fetal position. Her breathing was off too, and her anxiety only seemed to get worse on the ride to the hospital. As soon as we arrived, she started to relax, maybe because the adrenaline finally wore off. Once she was lying flat on the stretcher, we checked her torso for any other signs of injury. When I lifted her shirt, I felt a chill. Her skin was covered in dark, almost black bruises, spreading across her body. Rob wondered if it might be blood leaking from an organ, but I had no idea. Nothing in my training had prepared me for bruising that looked like that. She might have taken a hard fall during whatever happened, but the extent of the bruising was disturbing. I know older people bruise more easily, but this was way beyond what I had ever seen. After checking her into the ER, I was rolling her gurney down the hall when she suddenly sat up and grabbed my arm. Her grip was intense, like she was holding on for her life. I felt her nails biting into my skin, enough to draw blood, and as much as I tried to pull away, she clung to me like she was rooted there. It took several nurses and doctors to pry her off. Once she let go, they rushed me into an ER room to take care of my arm. I ended up needing 5 stitches and some strong pain meds. They kept me there until the following evening to monitor for any signs of infection or other complications. When I was finally allowed to leave, Rob was there, ready to drive me home. On the way, he mentioned something that made my stomach drop. According to the police report, there was no sign of a break-in. No broken windows, no locks tampered with, no forced doors. Hearing that left me with a deep, uneasy feeling. If there had been no intruder, then the only way she could have gotten those injuries was if she had hurt herself somehow, and that just did not add up. Once I was home, I sank onto my couch, feeling shaken and deeply unsure about what we just encountered. For the next few days, I felt pretty much just stuck at home. In a town like mine, everything is spread out, and you need to drive to get anywhere. With one hand out of commission, I was not willing to risk an accident, so I ended up doing my best with basic chores around the house, like laundry and cleaning, tasks that proved way tougher with only one good hand. Rob would swing by now and then whenever he had a break from work. He'd check up on me and even bring over dinner sometimes since cooking was near impossible one-handed. More often than not, we'd dig into some Chinese takeout, sharing fortune cookies and easy conversation. He did complain about the trip to my place, though. My house sits out in the sticks, with a gravel driveway full of potholes that the rain just loves to deepen. Even he found driving here in the evening a bit of a pain. For the next couple of weeks, I had regular checkups at the hospital to make sure my arm was healing right. The doctor told me it would take a while before the feeling returned to my hand, and even longer for full strength to come back. One night after a hospital visit, I decided to take a long shower, hoping the warm water might help relax me. But as I stood under the spray, I realized I could not feel a thing in my arm. And then something weird happened. When I shut off the water, I caught my reflection in the fogged-up mirror and saw that my shadow was just a second behind my movements. I waved my arm back and forth, but there was this odd lag, almost like my hand and shadow were out of sync. It left me feeling unsettled, like I was losing my mind. After a minute, I chalked it up to exhaustion and the pain meds from the hospital and decided to call it a night. Around 3:45 a.m., I woke up thirsty as usual and headed to the kitchen for some water. I do not sleep through the night often, so this was nothing new. But as I filled my glass, something caught my eye. Living out here alone, I am used to things being quiet and empty, so when I thought I saw a figure slip from the hallway into the laundry room, my heart skipped a beat. My grip nearly loosened on the glass. Trying to stay calm, I put the water down and made my way back to the bedroom. With my one good hand, I reached into my desk drawer for my Glock 34. I loaded a round into the chamber as best as I could, then crouched low in the darkness, aiming the gun at the hallway, ready for whatever might come out. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 5 minutes. Nothing happened. Finally, I rose up, gun still in hand, and began clearing each room one by one. Every step was nerve-wracking, expecting someone to be hiding, ready to jump out. Room by room I checked, but there was nothing. Not a single thing out of place. No broken windows, no muddy footprints. I went over to the window in the laundry room, trying to figure out how anyone could have been up here since it was on the second floor. The paranoia started creeping in. I switched on every light, combing through every room, checking every lock and window. Everything was locked up tight, with no sign of forced entry. Yet I could not shake it. I had seen someone. It felt too real to be nothing. But as much as I hated to admit it, deep down I started thinking that it had to be the exhaustion and painkillers twisting things up. I found myself muttering to myself, gun still gripped in my hand, feeling like I was on the edge of losing it. After that night, I developed a new habit of double-checking every window and door, going over each lock not just once but twice. I could not let whatever happened back then happen again. The thought of it was chilling, and I wanted to be absolutely certain everything was locked up tight. A few days later, I started easing back into my normal routine, taking care of chores around the house. Still, I could not shake the unsettling feeling that something was lingering just out of sight, biding its time, waiting for me to let my guard down. I have never been one to buy into stories about aliens or the supernatural. In fact, I have always thought ghosts and paranormal stuff were a load of nonsense, the kind of things staged for attention or faked on the internet. But after all that happened that night, I could not just brush it off as a mix of painkillers and exhaustion. Something deeper was gnawing at me, and I could not ignore it. Then one evening, as I got up to head back inside, I glanced down and realized my shadow was missing. My stomach dropped, and for a moment I was stunned, almost laughing at the absurdity of it as I moved around, half dancing, trying to catch any glimpse of it. For a split second, I even thought of myself as some kind of vampire without a reflection. But then it hit me. The strange stuff in the shower, the figure in my house. It all pointed to something more than just a trick of the eye. There was something going on here, something far beyond what I first assumed. That night I went to bed feeling uneasy. I locked my bedroom door and kept my handgun within reach on the nightstand, just in case. But strangely, nothing happened. Not that night, not the next, and not even during the day. Days went by, and I started thinking maybe it was all in my head after all. One morning I woke up to a beautiful scene. Sunlight filtered softly through the trees and blinds, and the sounds of birds filled the air. I felt like I was in a dream. I put on some music and with some effort made myself breakfast. Eggs and bacon, half burned, flipping them clumsily with my one good hand. I took my plate out to the porch, enjoying the sun as I scrolled through the news. But then I noticed something strange. My phone would not turn on. It was completely dead, and just like that, my peaceful moment evaporated. I realized that this was, in fact, a dream. The cozy morning scene faded, and I found myself back in bed, staring into an impenetrable darkness that filled my room. It was pitch black, the kind of darkness where you cannot even see your own hand. The only light came from my alarm clock, which showed 3:45 a.m., exactly like before. As I gathered my thoughts, I heard the steady drum of rain against the window. A storm had rolled in out of nowhere. There had been no mention of it in last night's forecast, but then again, our town's weather reports were not the most reliable. Jesus Christ, I muttered, watching as the rain poured down, the sky briefly illuminated by flashes of lightning that revealed dark, brooding clouds. The moonlight mixed with the lightning, casting strange shadows around the room. Then something strange caught my eye. An overpowering sense of dread tightened around my chest, filling my lungs like I was drowning. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, trying to pinpoint what was making me feel this way. Instinctively, I reached for my gun, but I stopped myself. There was nothing visibly out of place. That's when I noticed in the faint glow of the moonlight that I had no shadow. Again. Jesus Christ, I heard again, but this time it was not my own voice. It was twisted, distorted, echoing through a range of unsettling pitches. I glanced down at the foot of my bed, and my stomach dropped. There, halfway sticking out from beneath the bed, was a figure, a matte black, grotesque version of a human. Half of its body was hidden under the bed, the other half sprawled out toward me. My scream erupted louder than I knew I was capable of, an unrecognizable sound that terrified me as much as the sight before me. Jesus Christ, it said again, the words gravelly and deep, dripping with malice as it grew louder. I collapsed to the floor, scrambling back in horror as the creature slithered under the bed. Desperation shot through me as I crawled toward the door, realizing too late that my gun was still on the nightstand. God damn it, I muttered, my voice shaking. I lunged for the light switch and flipped it on, but just as I got to my feet, a sharp, searing pain exploded in my ankle. Looking down, I saw a deep cut along the side of my ankle, blood pouring out in sickening waves. It looked like it had been sliced open by something razor sharp. I fell again, gasping, and when I glanced back at the bed, two yellowish-brown eyes stared back at me from the darkness underneath. God damn it, it repeated, this time in a jagged, broken tone that grated against my nerves. It was mimicking me, mocking me, and fear surged through me so strong, it felt like my entire body was on fire. I tried to get to the door, but it refused to budge. Tears streamed down my face as I fought with the door handle, glancing back over my shoulder to see if the creature was creeping toward me. Finally, the door gave way, and I flung myself out of the room, crying and screaming as I slammed it shut behind me. But just before the door clicked, I caught one last glimpse of the thing beneath my bed. It was still there, watching me with a fixed predator's gaze, tracking my every move. I crawled along the floor, leaving a slick trail of blood from my injured ankle, staining the wooden boards and painting the stairs dark red. With every ounce of strength, I managed to get to my feet and hobbled to the kitchen, where I kept a first aid kit. I threw open the kit, spilling some of the supplies onto the floor, where they quickly soaked up my blood, the stark white gauze turning a dark crimson. The cut must have hit an artery, judging by how quickly the blood was pooling around me. I grabbed a tourniquet and fastened it around my leg, biting down hard as I twisted the windlass, pushing down with all my strength until I nearly blacked out. Tears streamed down my face from the pain, but I had no other choice. I could feel the bleeding finally start to slow, and I fumbled to disinfect and wrap the wound as best I could, layering gauze over the deep slice. It was far from perfect, but it was all I had. My ankle still throbbed like hell, the pain pulsing up my leg. I forced a bitter laugh through clenched teeth. Of course it would hurt. As I tightened the bandage, I could hear movement from my bedroom. Whatever was in there was stirring, shifting with a weight that made the floorboards creak and groan. The thing under my bed was still inside, and from the sound of it, it was moving. And whatever it was not coming to give me a hug. My car keys were in the bedroom, so making a clean escape wasn't an option unless I wanted to limp 5 miles through the rain and possibly risk infection or worse. Desperate, I grabbed a flashlight and decided my only choice was to hide. I hobbled down the stairs, keeping to the shadows to avoid drawing attention. Reaching the guest bedroom, I slipped inside, locking the door behind me, and switched on the flashlight, the small beam of light barely enough to calm me. I could hear that thing up in my room, groaning and making these twisted, inhuman noises as it roamed. Every so often it tried to speak, its garbled voice echoing, "God damn it! God damn it!" It was mimicking me, its voice warped, whispering and shouting at the same time, reverberating through the walls and windows, creeping into the room where I hid. The sounds it made grew more disturbing, Heavy, stomping footsteps transformed into sickening, squelching noises, like someone squeezing the guts out of a watermelon and a pumpkin. I froze, paralyzed by terror, unable to move. The realization hit me. I didn't have a plan. No idea what to do next. I just sat there, huddled in the dark, trembling as the creature prowled my house, my mind reeling. After what felt like hours, the house finally fell silent. The dread hung thick in the air, but I knew if I stayed here, that thing would find me eventually. Summoning every last bit of courage I had, I resolved to escape this nightmare. I'd been through rough situations before, but nothing like this. Still, I wasn't about to let my story end here. I stood up, steeling myself, and crept over to the door. With a shaking hand, I cracked it open to peer into the hall. But as soon as I looked, I saw it. The thing was waiting, staring right at me. It was no longer human-like in any way. Now it was a twisted mass of flesh and bones, its skin pale and sickly. It had no face, only eyes that looked ripped from another's body. Bones jutted out at impossible angles. The ulna was shoved into its rib cage, making its arm a grotesque tube of meat. Its rib cage was twisted backward, protruding halfway out of its chest, bending in ways that defied anatomy. I yelped and slammed the door shut, but it wasn't enough. The creature barreled through, the door splintering as it forced its way in, shrieking like a child throwing a tantrum. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice tearing from the force. I was losing it, my mind unraveling. The thing paused, then repeated my words in that gurgling voice. "What do you want from me?" I gagged as it regurgitated the words, the flesh on its body melting and sloughing off like ice cream left out too long, inching closer. My hands shook as I held the flashlight, its weak beam illuminating only patches of the grotesque horror oozing toward me. I looked down and realized, to my horror, I'd pissed myself in fear. "Jesus Christ," it burbled, taunting me, echoing the realization. I felt anger surge through me, drowning the terror. I wasn't going to let this thing mock me, reduce me to this. Gritting my teeth, I lunged, charging at it with all I had, not caring about the blood oozing from my ankle. But the creature was ready. It opened its mouth. No, its maw, a grotesque ear-to-ear gash, lined with teeth that looked like a cross between a T-Rex and a hippo's. I couldn't stop my momentum, and I barreled straight toward it. The jaws clamped down over me, half my body trapped as the teeth dug into my flesh. I screamed and thrashed, blood spurting from my shoulder as I struggled. But it was useless. Its teeth bore down again, harder this time, ripping into muscle and tissue, tearing me apart bit by bit, unmoved by my pain as it chewed into me. Then just as suddenly, the creature loosened its grip and released me. I fell to the floor, gasping in shock, as it backed up and stared at me. My flashlight had rolled into the corner during the attack, leaving only the faint silhouette of the creature against the dim light in the room. It lurched forward again and struck me squarely on the head. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a chair, disoriented and weak, with dawn breaking through the windows and casting a hazy blue light over the room. I found myself in the living room, my laptop open in front of me. Was it all a dream? I muttered, still reeling. But then my shoulder throbbed, and I glanced down to see my flesh torn apart, exposing bone. With every shallow breath, I could feel something pressing against my ribs, almost like a piece of me was trying to escape from within. I tried to look around, but my body wouldn't respond. Across the room in the corner, the creature lurked, just as grotesque as before. Its mangled form more monstrous, a strange blend of human-like features and raw, pulsing matter. Then with a sickening twist, the thing began to shift and ripple. Slowly, parts of it started pushing outward from inside, like something struggling to break free from a twisted cocoon. First, a hand broke through the creature's belly, then a leg, then a face, until the creature's body tore open, spilling sludge, bits of bone, and fragments of flesh all over the walls. What emerged was a nightmare in itself, a being that looked exactly like me. A wave of horror washed over me as I realized it had replicated my entire form, down to every last detail, my height, my skin, even the shape of my face. The creature moved toward me, extending its bloody hand to touch my cheek. I recoiled and threw up, the vomit spilling over my shirt as it patted my head with a twisted mockery of comfort. "Just relax," it said, its voice warped but unmistakably mine. I tried to shake its hand off, but every move sent sharp pains through my neck and spine, my bones cracking and popping as I struggled. I thrashed helplessly in the chair, trapped, while the doppelganger's fingers began morphing, growing sharp and claw-like. Just then, I heard my phone ring. It was Rob calling to check up on me. The creature growled in frustration, glaring at the phone, but didn't make a move to stop it. My phone kept ringing, then it buzzed with text after text. Rob relentless as always when he was worried. My doppelganger wasn't going anywhere, and the only hope I had now was Rob. I tried to scream, to get his attention, but all that escaped my throat was a raspy whisper. Moments later, I heard Rob's car pulling up outside, and I summoned every ounce of strength I had left, hoping he'd hear me. I could hear him calling for me from his car, expecting me to come to the door. But instead, my double stepped outside, walking toward Rob, mimicking my voice perfectly. My heart sank as I watched the two of them talking casually on the front porch. Then I caught something, a small exchange that sparked a sliver of hope. Rob asked about my arm, mentioning he hadn't seen any stitches. My mimic invited him in to show him what happened. "No, don't come in," I tried to scream, but my voice was barely a whisper, weak and useless. Moments later, Rob followed the creature toward the door, unaware. My double swung the front door wide open, giving me one last sickening grin as it stepped inside, looking at me with that unnerving, gleeful smile, like it had just won some twisted game. Rob followed closely behind my mimic, expecting to step in for a quick chat and a hot cup of coffee after his long night shift. But as he entered, his hopeful smile twisted into horror. Rob froze in the doorway, dropping to his knees as he took in the sight. Me, barely slumped over in my chair, wheezing, blood-soaked and smeared with green vomit and waste, bits of entrails and flesh clinging to me like some grotesque second skin. He knelt there in stunned silence, his face pale. Slowly, Rob edged forward, his eyes locked on mine, unable to tell if I was really me. "Marcus, is that you?" he whispered, his voice quivering, nearly breaking into tears. I managed the slightest nod, the only movement I could muster, my eyes the only part of me still visible through the thick mask of blood and grime. He reached out to me, but a firm hand clamped down on his shoulder, the mimic's hand. It was like seeing my own hand grip his shoulder, pressing firmly against his blue work shirt. Then in one brutal move, it threw him across the room, sending Rob crashing against the wall with a loud thud, a gaping hole left where his body hit. Rob groaned, trying to get up, but the mimic was on him in an instant. Before Rob had a chance to react, the creature grabbed him by the collar as though he were weightless and lifting him with ease. The mimic opened its ghastly, oversized mouth, strings of saliva and thick mucus dripping from its rows of needle-sharp teeth. Its tongue was long, drooping from its maw, while the roof of its mouth was incomplete, with raw fibers and gaps, like open fish gills. Rob's head was inches away from being torn off. "Wait!" I rasped, barely able to speak. The creature paused, holding Rob mid-air, its jaw snapping shut. "What?" it hissed, voice laced with mockery. "What could you possibly want in these last pathetic moments? How does a taste of lead sound, you bastard?" In that instant, Rob reached into his waistband, pulling out his .45 and unloading the entire magazine into the mimic. Each bullet slammed into the creature, some piercing its torso, others tearing through its head. It let out a soul-rending scream, so loud it left my ears ringing, then crumpled forward and collapsed to the ground. Rob, visibly shaken, scrambled to his feet and rushed to me. Without a word, he slung me over his shoulder, carrying me out of that nightmare. As we made it to his car, I glimpsed movement in the doorway. The mimic was still standing, somehow. Rob got me into the passenger seat, gunned the engine, and then noticed the creature lurching forward, shedding pieces of itself. Flesh peeled away, chunks sloughing off to reveal smooth, dark red muscle beneath, as if its skin was merely an outer layer it no longer needed. Rob quickly fired another round, each shot tearing into the mimic. But instead of falling, it seemed to be shedding its own flesh, revealing a sinewy, raw form underneath. A horrifying sight, like some skinned creature built entirely of pulsing muscle. Not waiting for the nightmare to escalate, Rob slammed the car into drive. He ran every red light and ignored every sign, pushing through traffic to get me to the hospital. Now, as I sit here, struggling to write down every last detail of that night, a thought lingers in my mind, clear and unshakable. If you ever find your shadow stops following you, don't ignore it.